Welcome to Series 2 of the Latte Lounge podcast. Join me, Katie Taylor, as we talk balancing hormones, busting myths, breaking taboos, boosting libidos, and bolstering confidence. Why not grab a coffee, take a seat, and join us in the Latte Lounge as we chat all things midlife, menopause, and beyond. With thanks to our friends at Clarence for making this podcast possible. In this episode, we'll be looking at why so many of us women struggle to maintain a healthy weight during midlife, menopause, and beyond. I'm going to be finding out how our hormones and our lifestyle play a big part in this, and how we can all optimize our diet with some very simple tweaks, which will ultimately help improve both our immediate and our long-term mental and physical health. To explain it all, I'm joined by nutritionist and author Jackie Lynch, who is the founder of the award-winning Well Nutrition Clinic, where she specialises in women's health and the menopause. Keen to break the taboo about discussing the menopause, Jackie launched her own popular podcast, The Happy Menopause, in 2019. And her third book, The Happy Menopause, Smart Nutrition to Help You Flourish, is out now. Jackie's advice features in a range of national media, radio and TV, including Channel 4's Superfoods. And she's also a Guardian Masterclass tutor too. So welcome, Jackie. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, Katie. It's great to be here.
Oh, now listen, there are so many women in our Facebook group and the wider community, often complain about gaining weight around their middles, or perhaps not being able to lose or maintain weight in the same way that we used to be able to when we were younger. And obviously the impact on this, can lead to low mood and low confidence, perhaps things like lack of libido, even eating disorders. So I just thought, I'd love to ask you first, sort of what is happening, what is changing in our bodies and our minds during this time of lives? And obviously, why is it happening?
Well, the short answer is everything's changing, and that's the problem, really. We have estrogen receptors all over the body, and with the fluctuation of hormones that you get during the perimenopause and the menopause, what's actually going to be going on here is that everybody's system is affected from the brain right through to the gut. And so you're feeling it at every level. And one of the things that we notice a lot as women move through midlife, almost irrespective of the menopause, because it's an issue that men struggle with as well, is that our metabolism just generally slows down and everything becomes a bit more sluggish. And that tends to coincide usually with the time of the menopause. So although the hormones do play a role, and stress certainly plays a huge role, it's a bit of a perfect storm of everything coming together and making life just incredibly difficult. And as you rightly point out, then it has a big impact on you, not just in terms of actual gaining fat, specifically around the middle, which is really common, but it affects you in other ways, because the fluctuation of progesterone is the one that tends to affect our cognitive function, our emotional side of things. And of course, if you're already feeling low mood, a sense of paranoia or anxiety, which is very common, then gaining weight is just going to sort of contribute to that and contribute to your loss of body confidence, which might mean, I can't go to the gym now, I can't get into my lycra in front of these young things. And though it starts to become a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, which can be really tricky to get out of.
Yeah, and I relate so much to this. I mean, and it's often the problem is during this time is you don't know where to attack it from. I sort of see the midlife and menopause as this circle. From my own personal experience, which people who listen to series 1 will know, is that, I tried everything. I went to my doctor and they said, oh, well, lose weight and get fit and all your symptoms will go away. And actually, when you've got no energy, when you've got brain fog, when you're depressed and you're lying at home and you're perhaps comfort eating, you're gaining weight. And the last thing you want to do, as you said, is go out and go to the gym or even have that ability to even engage with some sort of sensible eating plan. So, what I wanted to ask you, because when we were younger, especially some of us who grew up in the 80s, we were all into low fat and counting calories and things perhaps did work. We'd always lose a couple of pounds a week. But things now change, and we need to be looking at long-term health, not just sort of, losing a bit of weight for that dress. So what would you suggest is a really sensible nutrition plan to help women in midlife to perhaps lose those extra pounds gained, or just to maintain a healthy weight and improve their menopause symptoms too?
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. We are that generation who grew up in the whole low fat thing, and it's really difficult to get out of that. And the problem we've got is that, gone are those days where you could, lose half a stone in a week and by Saturday you were in the little black dress. I mean, that's long gone. So I think first things first, you have to adjust your expectations. This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. Consistency really is everything when it comes to weight management, especially in midlife. So sticking to it is important. And what I encourage my clients to do in my nutrition clinic is really think about the nutrient content of what you're eating, not getting hung up on calories. Much in the same way as you might think more automatically about that when you're pregnant. You're thinking perhaps, well, what's good for the baby? What should I eat that's good for the baby? Because, we women, we're always thinking about something else, right? So I'd like us all to be thinking in much the same way, that actually what's going on here is, well, okay, this might have, quote, high fat content, but what's actually in it? How is it good for me? Only yesterday, I was talking to a client who was saying, they were very worried about using flaxseed because of the high fat content and their weight. And the body doesn't use dietary fat and convert it to fat cells. If it wasn't called fat, we wouldn't all get so confused. That's the thing. It needs a rebrand, poor old fat. Inevitably, eat too much of anything and you'll get fat. There's no doubt about it. But the first thing the body will do with fat that you've eaten, and that includes saturated fat, is it will use it to make hormones. The body uses saturated fat to make sex hormones. The body uses the essential fats, the omegas, omega-3, omega-6, to support things like heart health, brain health, skin and hair, and really important for the nervous system. And all of those are probably ringing bells to people thinking, oh, well, I've got brain fog. I've read about, cardiovascular issues for menopausal women. You want to be getting these things in your diet. So don't just think, oh, well, it's only got 98 calories, so I can have this caramel slice thing that's from some diet company, compared to the avocado that's more than that, because the avocado is going to be packed with omega-9 monounsaturated fats, great for your heart. It's going to be packed with vitamin E, really important for your skin. And so many of us struggle with issues around our skin. So start to think about nutrient content and the quality of what you're eating rather than the calories. That's the first thing I'd say.
It's so funny. You hit the nail on the head when you mentioned the flax seeds, because, I know for myself, those years of that, I suppose, is misinformation. Even reaching for some olive oil, I'm like, oh, well, I better not. That's oil, that's fat, that will make me fat. And then you look at all these women who have this wonderful Mediterranean diet, and there's olive oil thrown over their mozzarella tomato, and without a care in the world. So,
Yeah.
let's have a look at what foods and drinks, should we all be incorporating into this sort of sensible nutrition plan to optimize our diet for not just for long-term health, but obviously weight maintenance, perhaps weight loss as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that women are particularly bad at, I think, are getting enough protein-rich foods. Men really just get that. They instinctively know they need protein for muscle, and they'll just make sure they eat it. They tend to take a dim view of a meal that doesn't have a good chunk of protein in it. And they're right. But we often don't go that route and think, oh, a bit of chicken in the evening will do the trick. Well, it's not enough. Now, the great thing about protein-rich foods, and I'm thinking things like meat, fish, eggs, or the lovely plant proteins like lentils, chickpeas, beans, soya, nuts and seeds, is that they're rich in protein, but they also contain fat. So you've got that double whammy of two compounds, A, that the body really needs. Now, protein's all about growth and repair of cells, but also the whole body's made of protein. So our skin, our hair, our nails, our bones and our muscles all need good quality protein. And remember, the heart is a muscle too. And our risk of coronary heart disease increases exponentially post-menopause because of the loss of protective estrogen on the heart. So we want to make sure our heart muscle's in great shape. And our body will prioritize our vital organs like our heart, our lungs, our liver, over our skin or hair, our nails, if we're not getting enough protein. So making sure you're getting plenty of protein is great. And from a weight management perspective, that's going to do two things. First of all, protein really helps to regulate blood sugar levels. It reduces and slows down the release of carbohydrate in the body. So that really keeps you going for longer, which is great. But that fabulous combination of protein and fat also regulates the satiety response, which helps to tell us when we're full. So instead of sort of eating everything that's on the plate and then thinking what's next, actually suddenly you're like, oh, okay, no, I'm done. I've had enough, and that's great.
Yeah, it's interesting. Someone once said to me, you could sit there and eat cakes and crisps and biscuits and non-stop, and you would never get full. But I bet you couldn't eat an entire chicken. And that's so
Yeah,
true. It's just
yeah,
you'll have some chicken and you're full pretty quickly.
yeah,
So
it's
yeah, really good advice. I mean, can we sort of break it down even more simply? Like when you're faced with, perhaps a midlife woman or a woman over 40 who's already perhaps struggling with weight maintenance or symptoms, what would a really good healthy breakfast look like for you, and lunch and dinner?
well, it's that combination of protein and complex carbohydrate. Much as we're the generation who've been sort of taught and been drilled into us, low fat, low fat, low fat, carbs are demonized now. And we've got to remember that not all carbs are equal. Yes, an excessive amount of simple carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates, or sugary foods, the body will turn that into fat cells much more quickly. But the complex carbohydrate, which is really rich in fiber, is going to keep you going for longer. It's our quickest and easiest source of energy, so we don't get tired and fatigued. Big issue for menopausal women. It supports digestion. If your digestion's good, if you're not constipated, that's going to help with your metabolism. We all know that metabolism is a key player in weight management. So for me, it's the balance. So I would be looking at great source of protein, which would be eggs, for example, maybe with some wholemeal toast. Or if you don't want the starchy carbohydrate, you could have it with other forms of fiber like avocado or spinach, mushrooms, tomatoes, something like that. If you're more of a cereal woman, then great. Make sure it's a whole grain cereal, perhaps like oats. Check the label if you're using a commercial cereal. Anything that's got more than about 5 grams of sugar per serving, 10 grams of sugar per serving is going to be very sugary beyond that. So be careful. Look at something that's high protein, that's got at least 5 grams of fiber in there. And then add more. Add a spoon of pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, flaxseed. That's going to boost the protein content, keep you going for longer, and it's also going to add fiber. And then if you've had that wonderful combo of protein and fiber, your blood sugar remains stable, you don't have the mid-morning crash, and you're not going to be craving the biscuits and the goodies that we all know are the main culprits when it comes to weight gain. If you can manage those cravings, then it all gets a lot easier.
Yeah. And what about sort of portion sizes? Because again, we've all
Yeah.
grown up with this whole, just limit, weigh things, and none of us want to be doing that in this time of our lives.
Oh, jeepers. I mean, really, weighing things, life is way too short. I sort of go on fist sizes. Most of us are probably having larger portions than we need. It's one of the things I see a lot in my clinic again. The women who'll say to me before we meet, well, I have a pretty healthy diet. And in fairness, when I look at their food diary, I think, well, yeah, you do. You do eat really good stuff. It's just too much of it. That's the problem. We just don't need that much. So knowing that a portion of cereal, whatever it is, whether it's your, overnight oats or a commercial cereal, 30 grams is really what we should be looking at. And when you weigh that out for the first time to see what it looks like, it's not as much as you think. It's really not very much at all. So important to sort of do that a couple of times so you then start to know what your portion should look like. You don't need to weigh it every day because we're intelligent women. We can remember after a little while. When it comes to lunch and dinner, you want to be thinking of a quarter of the meal should be protein. So I'm thinking a fist size, roughly the equivalent of a chicken breast or a salmon steak, for example, or a couple of big dollops of hummus if you're on a plant-based diet. And then if you're having starchy carbohydrate like rice or pasta or whatever, firstly, make it whole grain. So it's that complex carbohydrate. And secondly, it's only a fist size. You don't need more than that. Even if you're going to the gym for an hour every day, simply don't need more than that. Unless you're at elite level, which most of us aren't, competitive, international athletics. Yeah, that's not most of us. We don't need that much. If you are operating at club or competitive level, you already know the level of carbohydrates you should be having in relation to carb loading pre-events and so on. But for most of us, that's that quarter of the meal is ample. And if you're really struggling, it's also worth considering avoiding the starch in the evening. That's something I commonly recommend, particularly those of us who have quite a sedentary lifestyle, because if you have starch at lunchtime, that's going to be giving you sufficient energy. And then you can make essentially 75% of the meal vegetables instead of half the plate. What often happens is people have, a bit of protein, one veg, and then half the meal is starch. I'd reverse it. Quarter protein, quarter starch, half the meal vegetables. Or if you're avoiding that starch, then 3/4 of the meal vegetables. Start to follow that. And you don't need to think about weighing stuff. And you don't need to think, oh, am I getting enough B vitamins? Am I getting enough magnesium? Because if you're having that lovely range of vegetables, then you will be. And you're getting all the protein and fat you need in that protein portion. So then it starts to become easier.
And what would you say about people who are perhaps used to snacking in between meals? There's a lot of people whose jobs are sedentary. Like myself, I'm in front of a computer at a desk a lot of the time. There are others who are on the road and perhaps don't have time to, and the doctors and nurses who just are sort of having to sort of quickly grab snacks or meal times.
Yeah.
What would you suggest for those sort of situations?
Yeah, those of us who can, I'd say, have a really good meal at meal times, and then it should take you through to the next meal. Those of us who are on the go and it's much more difficult, plan. It's all in the planning. You still stick to the same process of protein and fiber combo. So if it's quick and easy, it might be maybe an apple or any fruit that's got an edible skin, because the fiber tends to hang around the skin. So that's going to be a bit more complex in the way of carbohydrate. It'll keep you going for longer. And then top it up with the protein. 7 or 8 almonds, not a great big handful, because you get a lot of almonds in your hand, or I can, and they're very moreish, but it's more a palmful. So about 7 or 8. Then you've got that protein fiber combo. Or start to look at some really good quality cereal bars, things like Bounce Balls, Pulsin bars, things that have got a good sort of 9 grams of protein in there that will really keep you going, and you can shove it in your pocket and grab a couple of bites and hide in the cupboard briefly if you're very busy or on the ward or something, and just give yourself something to keep you going. Because once the blood sugar crashes, you're just going to be absolutely vulnerable to all the cravings. If there's a cake on the table or biscuits around, then you'll just grab that because your body will be desperate. So you want to sort of get to the next meal feeling hungry but not desperate. If you've got to the desperate stage, your hormones have taken over. And they're then driving your food choices and not your brain. Because when your blood sugar crashes, your body releases stress hormones, because low blood sugar is dangerous, essentially. We're programmed to keep our blood sugar stable. So the stress hormones will take action by driving the cravings that will boost your blood sugar. And then you'll end up on this horrid seesaw up and down. It's really hard to control. But if you can get to the meal feeling hungry and not desperate, your brain's back in control, and you can have the salad that you promised yourself you would have that lunchtime.
Yeah. And it's funny because so many women are emotional eaters. They often are that sort of habit that's ingrained for when they're sad or depressed or even happy or celebrating. They, certain communities, it's all about meal times and food and kind of reward thing where, often I used to see mums who would reward their kids with a lollipop, and that almost sort of sets kids up for later in life expecting sweet treats as a reward. So I wanted to ask you actually about sugar and what it does, and also I want, if you wouldn't mind touching on diabetes, because again we hear a lot of women who have been diagnosed with diabetes 1 or 2, having never been a diabetic before, and I just wondered what the sort of connection between, what part does sugar play overall?
Well, sugar plays a big part. And of course, the pesky old menopause does increase our risk of certain conditions. It increases our risk of coronary heart disease. It increases our risk of type 2 diabetes. So keeping your blood sugar stable isn't just about, it'll keep me slim, which for the most part, it really will help with weight management. It's about making sure you don't get to a phase known as insulin resistance. Because if you're in a constant state of blood sugar imbalance, those highs and lows I described, That's not great, because when your blood sugar spikes, your body releases insulin to deal with that, because it's dangerous to have too much sugar in the blood. And insulin's job is to clear it all out, send it off to the liver to be stored. Now, if you've been, really racking up the cakes or the muffins, then what will happen is that any excess will be stored as fat cells. So that's the quickest and easiest way to gain weight. It's that excessive level of carbohydrate and sugar. It's not the only way to gain weight, but it's probably the simplest way and the way that most of us do. And because it's an emergency response, it doesn't carefully calculate how to measure out the sugar in the blood and leave you back in the right zone. It just hoovers up the whole lot. And in a short space of time, blood sugars crashed. That's when the stress hormones came out, as I've just described, and the whole process starts again, and you're going up and down. So if that's going on for a long period of time, and I don't mean a few days or weeks here and there, but for several months or several years, or you're someone who's glycemically sensitive and more prone to these swings, then you are at risk of insulin resistance, which is when the body cells stop responding so effectively to insulin. So the body has to pump out more insulin to balance the blood sugar, and then more, and then more. Eventually, can't do it anymore. And that's when you tip from insulin resistance to actual diabetes. And there are a number of symptoms of that blood sugar imbalance that are very characteristic. It's reliance on sugary foods or refined carbohydrate to keep you going. Dizziness, PMS, headaches, anxiety, weight gain, particularly around the middle, dizziness when you stand up quickly. There are a whole range of things that are classic symptoms of a blood sugar imbalance. And if those are starting to sound quite familiar to anyone listening, and they probably are because they're quite common symptoms and they cross over with lots of menopause symptoms as well, then you've got to be thinking about, again, that protein and fiber combo. Keep that blood sugar nice and stable so that you're just reducing that risk, because you've got enough to deal with as a midlife stroke menopausal woman without having to add chronic health conditions on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I recently, I think it was during the Midlife Festival, actually, I interviewed a lady about menopause and ADHD and how so many midlife women are suddenly being diagnosed with ADHD in midlife. And she was saying to me that one of the symptoms is that ADHD women are dopamine seekers, and she sees over and over again women who perhaps are binge eaters or suffer from binge eating disorder, and that they're constantly seeking sugar. So I think for anyone listening who that might be another light bulb moment for them, there are just so many reasons why figuring out and optimizing our nutrition at this stage in life is just so important. One of the things I haven't asked you, which I'm quite curious about, is what part do you think the supplements should or can play in our diet, especially for those who perhaps feel their diet is optimized, but perhaps just aren't getting enough from the foods that they've incorporated, alone?
Yeah, I mean, it's all very well, isn't it, saying, well, you can get everything you need from a balanced diet. But the reality is that requires 50 different nutrients every day, which is hard work. We're busy people, and probably some meals are great and really balanced, and others are a bit of a car crash, because that's life. So I do think that a good quality multivitamin and mineral can be a helpful thing for women, or for anyone really. But, because there are so many reasons why, with our erratic lives, our busy lifestyle, stress that depletes or blocks the action of certain nutrients, other factors like tea or coffee block the absorption of iron. Tea can disrupt calcium levels in the body, cooking methods, storage, the longer foods traveled. All these things impact the bioavailability of our nutrients. So I tend to think a good quality multivitamin and mineral plays an important role in just keeping your metabolism nice and stable and really giving you that all-round support. And of course, the non-negotiable for we midlife women has got to be vitamin D. So even if I haven't convinced you about the multivitamin, you've got to take vitamin D, and you should be sort of taking between 1,000 to 3,000 international units every day. Frankly, winter and summer alike, I would say, because we're so careful, rightly so, of covering up now because of the risk of skin cancer. Need to make sure that we're getting the vitamin D we need, and the UVB rays can't make it through the sunscreen. So that's what the body uses to create vitamin D. And we need it for strong bones. We need it for our mental health. We need it for our immune function. It's a really important one.
Yeah, absolutely. And also a lot of women complain that as you touched on at the beginning, their hair is thinning and nails are breaking. And I think just everything that we can possibly do to have a really well-rounded nutritious diet is going to help with everything. Well, what would I mean, we often hear and you read in magazines about superfoods. Is superfoods a real thing? Like, what would your sort of top tips or sort of pearls of wisdom be if I said to you, Jackie, what if I could only include one or two things in my diet that I'm not doing already, what would they be?
Yeah, well, I mean, superfood's a marketing term, but it's also a term that we understand, and I don't have a problem with it as such. I think that provided you're getting the basics and you're getting your protein and complex carbohydrate as I've described, I would be looking at making sure that you are getting loads of omega-3 in your diet. So omega-3 fatty acids that you can find in things like oily fish, so sardines, mackerel, salmon, for example. Also, linseed and walnuts are great sources because that's a real all-rounder. It helps to support our nervous system and our brain health. Big issues for women in midlife. Really important for heart health. Really a great all-rounder for oiling our joints that can get a bit creaky at this time because the drop in estrogen affects that too. And great for our skin and our hair. So I'd say that's a good one. I'd say that flaxseed specifically is great. For me, it's a quadruple whammy of brilliance because it's a combination of protein and fiber. So a great one to add to breakfast to balance your blood sugar. It's packed with omega-3, as I've just mentioned. And specifically, it's also a really, really good source of phytoestrogens. And these are those plant compounds that mimic the action of estrogen in the body and can help to reduce menopause symptoms, things like hot flushes, night sweats, and so on. So having some of that in your diet, perhaps either in your cereal or in a smoothie every day, could be a great thing.
Last time we spoke, that was the one change I made. I now sprinkle flax seeds on yogurts and cereals, so I recommend it, and it tastes great too. So that's really good piece of advice. Jackie, you're obviously, as a nutritionist, you've helped thousands of women through your clinic, through your fabulous book, which I mentioned at the beginning, but it's called the Happy Menopause: Smart Nutrition to Help You Flourish, and also your Happy Menopause podcast. But what are the most common issues you see with us midlife menopausal women, other than things like weight gain? What are they coming to you mostly about, apart from that?
Well, the single biggest thing is stress. They don't come to me because of stress, but it's the biggest thing I see. They'll come to me very commonly. I would say perhaps the most common thing is fatigue and low energy. They're really struggling. Digestive issues, lots of IBS, constipation in particular, or bloating, I'll see, and headaches, probably the three big ones. Women do come and with hot flushes and night sweats, but they're rarely their primary concern because I think they just think, oh, they're a bit miserable, but I can deal with them. But it's the other things, it's sort of the anxiety, the mood issues, the fatigue that are a real problem, I think. And there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot that can be done. The menopause really does need an all-round approach, that holistic approach. And diet and lifestyle is a big part of the jigsaw and the other things that you're doing to support yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad we had this conversation today, because it's really important. There are lots of women who can't or don't want to take HRT for medical reasons or personal choice. There's also many of us, myself included, who are on HRT, but it's by no means the answer to everything. We still need to be eating well and moving. And so, having these sorts of conversations are just a really important, huge part of that jigsaw puzzle. Before I let you go, I just had one more question. The word gut health is a very big thing at the moment in the media, and again in the Midlife Festival, I was chatting to Professor Tim Spector actually about gut health. For those that don't know what gut health is, and they may not have watched that session, can you explain what gut health is and what gut healthy foods are, and why it's helpful to know and implement it?
Sure. Worth knowing, first of all, that the digestive tract starts in the mouth. It's a one long tube, goes down, comes in and out at various points, and then goes out the other end. Digestion technically starts outside the mouth before you eat. It's, you know, the odors of the food release the reason your mouth waters is you're releasing digestive enzymes that break down carbohydrates. So chewing your food right at the beginning is really important, a really important part of that, not least because chewing your food properly activates enzymes that release the satiety response in the body, which lets you know when you're full, which is why mindful eating is so important. And remind me to come back to that in a second, because there's a really good nugget I want to give you about weight loss in a minute. And then you can struggle with all manner of digestive issues. You know, you can have acid reflux and heartburn and indigestion and problems with the stomach. The stomach's sort of right up under the rib cage. People sort of point to their stomach and think it's down near the belly button. Yeah, that's not there. That's, you know, that's the large bowel. Yeah, you've got the small intestine and you've got the large intestine. And you can really struggle with issues around nutrient absorption. You can struggle with bloating. If you've got low stomach acid, your body won't be breaking down protein foods correctly in the stomach, which means that food can just feel as if it's sitting there, not going anywhere, even after quite a small meal. And then when it does go on its way, you've got particles of undigested food rubbing against the small intestine, causing bloating and wind and discomfort. Often people talk about, you know, churning and gurgling, and it's usually because you haven't broken down your food correctly. The large bowel, of course, and this is the thing I'm sure that Tim Spector spent a lot of time on, is the area where you've got the gut microbiome, that wonderful makeup of brilliant, beneficial bacteria that supports our digestive function, but also plays a huge role in our immune function, because 70 to 80% of our immune system is in the gut wall and relies on our beneficial bacteria to work well. So fiber is really important. Our gut microbiome thrives on fiber. So again, the brown stuff, the vegetables, the fruits with the edible skin, the pulses. It also thrives on variety. You know, my challenge to the listeners would be, you know, try and have 50 different foods each week, because we do get into a terrible rut of the same old, you know, chicken and salad and salmon and grilled vegetables or whatever. Mix it up a bit, because you can try different fish, different meats, loads of different vegetables, pulses, different types of beans or different nuts and seeds or grains. So something more unusual like amaranth or corn, because if your gut microbiome is seeing different stuff, it will perk up and start to multiply. If it sees the same old stuff, it'll think, oh yeah, whatever, I've seen that before. So keeping it nicely in tune is really important. And you can have fermented foods, things like kimchi, which is fermented vegetables, kefir, fermented milk, and kombucha, a fermented drink. And all of these are naturally high in the beneficial bacteria. So they can be great things to be including in your diet.
And you mentioned, before I let you go, I do want to ask you about mindful eating, because you know, I've often been told, oh, you eat so quickly, and you know, you forgot to drink any water, you were so busy just sort of eating. So yeah, well, what is mindful eating, and why should we all be incorporating it?
Well, mindful eating is basic. It's not as boring as it sounds. It's basically about savoring and enjoying your food and taking the time to do that. And there are two reasons why that's important. I've mentioned the first one. If you actually chew your food instead of swallowing large lumps of unchewed food, because let's face it, no teeth in our stomach, everyone. You won't get indigestion, which is always a good shout. But B, you'll activate the satiety response. You won't need to eat as much. But also there's some incredibly interesting research around the role of brain and memory in regulating appetite. So if you eat so quickly, you know, you're either eating in front of the TV and maybe enjoying it, but not really thinking about what's on your plate, or you're sort of grabbing it as you rush off to the next meeting or whatever, the brain doesn't imprint the memory, because you know, you're doing it so quickly, there's not time for the brain to focus on the fact, oh, isn't this a delicious piece of fish or potato or whatever it is I'm having, and it won't remember that you've had it. And so, you know, in probably less than an hour, you're already thinking, well, what's next? Because you haven't laid it down. There's a really interesting study about using amnesiacs. And in this study, they give them a plate of food and they eat it. And then they give them the same plate of food again immediately, and they eat that, because their brain has not registered that they've had the food and they're not feeling full as a result. And so then the third meal comes, and although it gets taken away because obviously it's unhealthy and it wouldn't be good for them, they would have eaten that as well. So really start to think about taking the time to sit down at a table to eat. Don't just do it mindlessly in front of your screen or your TV, or you're so busy chatting you don't know what you're eating. Think about savoring it. Really good food deserves to be enjoyed and should be a celebration. Then your brain will remember it, and then you're not going to be getting those munchies further down the line. So it's a really sort of quick and easy way of regulating your appetite.
It's fascinating that I'm smiling and laughing to myself because obviously I have a big family with 4 kids, and when we sit down to have a meal, everyone is grabbing because they're so worried there'll be nothing left. So you've got to be quick in this house to get anything. But I always say to them, just once it's on your plate, you can then actually slow down. No one is going to take that food away from you. So anyway, Jackie, listen, this has been really, really helpful. And obviously we could talk for hours, but where can people find out more about you and your fabulous book and podcast, and obviously on your socials too?
Oh, thank you. Well, you can find the Happy Menopause book on Amazon and all the other retailers that, whoever you prefer. The Happy Menopause podcast is in all the usual podcast places. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as @wellwellwelluk, or my website is well-well-well.co.uk.
Lovely. And we'll put all those in the show notes as well anyway. So
Fabulous.
Jackie, listen, thank you so much for sharing your wonderful words of wisdom today. And for everyone listening, I hope you found that very helpful and enjoy the next meal that you are planning based on this advice. Take care.
Thanks for having me, Katie. Great to chat.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Latte Lounge podcast. Please subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss our next episode. For more support with all things menopause and midlife, head to our website lattelounge.co.uk and search for the Latte Lounge group on Facebook. This podcast was sponsored by Clarence and produced by Emily Crosby Media.